Hey everyone, this is Kurt Frankum. Welcome to, I guess this is the first official Teaching General Conference podcast episode and YouTube video, whatever you want to say it. I'm excited to jump in. We're going to learn as we go. I may even come back and redo this talk just as I learn things after a few episodes, but we'll see. I got a lot of talks to get through and I'm excited to jump in. I've already enjoyed learning more about the specific talk. And the talk that we're going to focus on in this, which you already know from the title, is President Nelson's Overcome the World and Find Rest. I figure that most people will probably focus at some point. Most quorums and relief societies will probably focus on this talk since it's by our prophet and it's sort of his, paramount talk of the conference. And so I'm excited to get into it. First thing, and I'll make some like shorter episodes that I really encourage you to check out, like episodes that'll just teach you some really quick, basic teaching concepts that I apply that will maybe help you. And I'll refer to those throughout the videos as I do these videos and podcasts. And when I do that, I may say, hey, go check out this episode of that. And that will give you more information about it. So obviously, this isn't a commentary. I'm not going to break down the meanings, purposes of what President Nelson said. This isn't like scripture where we have to understand, ancient Hebrew in order to really understand what Isaiah is saying, or Greek in order to understand what Jesus meant by his, beatitudes or whatnot. This is contemporary language, and so it's up to you to interpret. I'm not a scholar, or I don't have any. I'm not privy to any information that would give me a deeper insight in that. So my hope here is to teach you or not teach necessarily, but give you some ideas of if you have to teach this talk in Elders Quorum or Relief Society, or maybe amongst your family, that you'll have some ideas of how to approach that to really stimulate a redemptive lesson. And that's actually a mini episode I'm going to be doing, is talking about why we need to focus on doctrine, what doctrine is, and not just focusing on doctrine, not just stating truths, but whenever we teach doctrine, it must, I repeat, it must be redemptive. And what I mean by that is individuals who sit in the class, they're not just learning facts, they're not just learning truths, but they're leaving feeling like, wow, my soul is redeemed. Like I know a little bit more about the doctrine and it's encouraging to me. It's hope, it instills hope in my soul, and I'm ready to face a new week, right? So many times we make the mistake of just, talking about various doctrine or principles of the gospel, but then it feels heavy, like, oh, I know I'm not doing enough, right? We never want individuals leaving a church class with that type of feeling of heaviness, of guilt. We want them to feel encouraged and feel redemptive. And so I'll talk about that in another episode. But a few concepts that I start out with. One, as you are preparing a lesson to teach General Conference, you need a warm-up segment. Okay, here's another mini episode that I'll get to, but in that mini episode about warm-ups, I will give you a few ideas, but you need to have the simplest format is a concept I call priming the pump. And this is where you stand in front of the class and ask a incredibly simple, basic question that anybody could answer, no matter who they are or their background, okay? The reason we do this is later on in the lesson, you are going to ask maybe for feedback. What do you think about this quote, this doctrine? What about this question, right? And so many times teachers, they get frustrated that nobody is responding, right? It's just dead silence and it's awkward. And then they think, oh, why don't people participate? And then they sort of put it on the classroom attendees that, oh, it's your fault. You should be helping me by participating. The problem is, and here's the power of it all, is that resistance. I heard it from a quote from a therapist. I'm gonna slaughter this, but basically, there's no such thing as resistance. You will never have a class member who is resisting participating. There's only the lack of safety. So if you're feeling like, oh, they're resisting, they don't want to contribute, they don't want to participate, that's only because you didn't warm them up, that you didn't establish safety. Like this classroom is a safe place for your voice to be heard. Okay. And if you establish that, it's going to make things a lot easier. So the quickest way to establish safety and get rid of resistance in a classroom is this prime the pump concept. And so you find a very simple question. So I live in Stansbury Park, Utah. One time I was teaching, my wife teaches Relief Society as well, and she used this. She stands up in front of the class and she just simply says, "What's your favorite thing about living in Stansbury Park, Utah?" And that's a very simple question. Everybody should have a response to that. Oh, I love the atmosphere. I love the neighborhood. I love the lake we have down the street that we can go there at any time and fish or go on go canoeing or whatever it is, right? Anybody, you could point at anybody and they wouldn't feel like, "Oh no, I don't have the answer." It's an opinionated question. It's not hard or intellectual. And what happens is people uh start to respond. They will then suddenly there's a shift in their mind of saying, "I've already spoken in this room, and now when a question is asked later on, I'm more likely to respond." So a good form of practice is on your lesson outline, write up what's my warm up. Okay. And if you no ideas come to mind, and I'll share various tactics, like I said in that mini episodes and in future episodes. If nothing comes to mind, just say, "What is a very basic question?" And it doesn't have to be related to anything like relevant. It could just be, "What's your favorite cereal? What did you always?" I'm recording this in the first part of October, right? Uh, you could ask, what was your typical Halloween costume as a kid, right? These are just fun, simple questions, but it gets the room talking. And you'll ask for responses, but you also point at people and say, "Brother Jones, what about you? What would your," right? And you're getting him to vocalize a response, and then he'll be more likely to respond. So, first step in creating an outline: what is my warm up? All right. The next thing I do is I go through the conference address and I just read through it once and I want to look for specific doctrinal statements or concepts. Okay. I'm skipping over the stories, like President Nelson shares the story of a tour of a temple, the DC temple. I'm just sort of breezing through that. I may come back to it and may look for concepts, but my first run through, I'm just looking for doctrinal points. So let me just give you an example, and yours may be different of what this looks like. And I've put them all in yellow. So for example, in spirit, experiencing the love of their love is vital, which he's referring to Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. All right, this is a concept. This is like a doctrine. Why is their love vital? Right. So I've marked it. And I keep coming down. Man, these paragraphs right here are chock full of doctrine. Okay. I won't maybe read it all, but for example, this paragraph: "The reward for keeping covenants with God is heavenly power." Boom. Doctrinal point, right? It's almost not even a principle. It is like eternal truth that will never change. When you keep covenants with God, you will receive power. That's not just a 2000s concept or an 1800s concept. This is true from the beginning of time and will be true from that until the end of time, right? So that's what you're going. What are the doctrinal points in this? I mean, these paragraphs right here, as I read through, it's like this could be a lesson. These 4 paragraphs only, right, could be a powerful lesson. Okay, I keep going. Here's some questions. The important truth prompts 3 fundamental questions. First, what does it mean to overcome the world? Second, how do we do it? And third, how does overcoming the world bless our lives? So these are doctrinally focused concepts. Okay. And I realize that some of you are just listening to audio, so I'll try and be a little more descriptive in what I'm talking about. Those 4 paragraphs I referenced earlier were that starts with, "Dear brothers and sisters, I grieve for those who leave the church because they feel membership requires too much of them." That's the first paragraph, and the 4 after that. Let's keep scrolling down. You can see that it's not every paragraph that has a doctrinal concept. Okay. It's related. Each paragraph is probably related to doctrine. It has an anecdote related to doctrine. Here's another one. "As we strive to live the higher law of Jesus Christ, our hearts and our very natures begin to change." Man, doctrine, right? Love it. The truth is, here's another one. "The truth is that it is so much more exhausting to seek happiness where you can find it. However, when you yoke yourself to Jesus Christ and the spiritual work required to overcome the world, he and he alone does have the power to lift you above the pull of this world." Further down, "But yoking yourself with the Savior means you have access to his strength and redeeming power." Hopefully you get the idea. Okay. So as I scroll down here, there's various lines and points that I've highlighted in yellow. You can pick whatever color you want. That's fine. Now, the reason why you want to go through and highlight doctrinal principles is that this is going to be the foundation of your lesson, right? It says throughout all the handbooks, teach doctrine, right? That is why we're doing it. We're teaching doctrine. You cannot teach doctrine until you identify what the doctrine is in the talk. Now, let me tell you, this talk by President Nelson, obviously no surprise to anybody. You could literally focus on this talk for the next 6 months in all your elders quorum and relief societies, right? What's that, about 12 sessions of classroom time, right? And you could take and talk about this for 12 sessions, right? The trap you will fall into is that you will try and there's 12 classes of content, enough, to fill 12 classes. You will try and fill it in one classroom. Do not do that. This is why you go and you identify specific doctrines, and then you're going to start and say, I'm going to focus on one of those doctrines. I may skip over all the funny stories, the jokes he told. I may skip 90% of the scriptures that he shared, the scripture references he shared, because you have to focus on a specific doctrine and let it just air out, let it feel the space. People can go home and read it. You're not, sometimes we put that heaviness on us, like, oh, it's up to me to make sure that these people understand every concept that President Nelson was talking about. No. You're introducing a doctrinal concept that is redemptive, so that when they walk out of that class, they feel like, okay, whew, I am charged up for the week. I just partook of the sacrament. I renewed my covenants and then went to elders quorum. And now I'm feeling like I can take on another week, and I can't wait to come back next week. All right. So with these concepts, it's not that I have identified all the doctrine in this, but that's what that's just what I got through one read through, thinking, okay. So for example, I may take these 4 paragraphs, and there's probably too much doctrine in here to teach in one class. So I may take one paragraph, right? So for example, let's go to this last one. Dear brothers and sisters, my message to you today is that because Jesus overcame this fallen world, and because he atoned for each of us, you too can overcome this sin-saturated, self-centered, and often exhausting world. That alone is 40, 50 minutes of content that you can explore, okay? So first thing is, and again, I'm not here to dictate which doctrine you're going to cover. You don't need a modern-day contemporary scholar who's going to give you commentary on this talk. The commentary's there. President Nelson gave you enough commentary to deal with. What we're doing is just simply focusing on the principles. Okay. So you are, and let me pull up my notes here, which some of it didn't get saved because the Gospel Library has a little bit of a bug that sometimes erases my notes. Do you have this problem? Anyways, if you don't save as you go, it becomes a nightmare. It's sort of frustrating. Anyways, so the doctrine's in yellow. Figure out the warm up, right? You already have warmed them up. And then you're going to think about, you're going to take that doctrine and then help the room digest it. You're now inviting the room into an engagement practice with this. You're not there to dictate or to give a talk, right? This isn't a lecture. And if you try and cover all the doctrine, that's why we fall into that trap of lecturing, because you think, oh, there's so much here. If I just talk the whole time, I might be able to get through most of it. So I'm just going to do that, right? But the learning in the room just dissipates when we do that. So we're going to take one doctrine and move forward. And then you may do a few things like this. Like one thought I had is breaking up the room into partners. And I'm going to do a micro episode on this. There's something about when the teacher says, all right, everybody partner up, turn to your neighbor, and I want you to talk about this question. There's sort of this resistance, like, oh, you know what? It's been a long week. I'm at church. I just had a crazy sacrament meeting with my 10 kids or whatever it is. I just want to sit here and have you dictate at me. But resist that, okay? You're going to invite them in the simplest way, sort of the bare bones way of doing this is just simply saying, I want you to get with a neighbor and answer some questions. Okay. And so you go back to this doctrine that you've picked on and you've asked yourself, what are some questions that I could come up with to get them thinking? Right. And hopefully they're questions that don't easily fall into the quote unquote Sunday school answer, right? Where they're just like, oh, well, that means we should just go to church and read our scriptures. We want to push them past that. Okay. So you may take that doctrine and say, okay, let's group up 2 or 3 members. You really don't want more than 4 in a group. Maybe there's some tactics that we'll talk about that would work, but getting them in a group, 2 or 3 people, and saying, all right, let's talk about these questions. So if I did this, no, let me put that back on the screen here. So if I did this quote of, dear brothers and sisters, my message to you today is that because Jesus Christ overcame this fallen world and because he atoned for each of us, you too can overcome the sin-saturated, self-centered, and often exhausted world. And so you may say, okay, with your partner, let's think about what would you classify as sin-saturated, self-centered, and often exhausted world? Why do you think President Nelson used those 3 concepts? Take 3 minutes and go, right? And then chatter, chatter, chatter. People are talking it through. Okay, what does it mean that because of Jesus Christ, we can overcome those things? Like, what does that even mean to you? What does that look like in real life, right? And maybe before you talk as a group, maybe take 1 minute and just ponder over this yourself. What stories, what examples come to mind? What experiences when you felt like Jesus Christ has helped you overcome the fallen world, right? So go. So let's maybe silent for 1 minute. All right, now that we're back, turn to your partner and each take 1 minute to articulate this. Now you see, as we're doing these activities, as you're engaging the group in talking and turning your partner, that's going to take a lot of time, right? And the temptation is you're thinking up there as a teacher, oh no, like I have so much to get through. We can't do that activity. Let's just skip it and move on. No. Because you're then prioritizing your agenda, your lesson plan over the actual learning and unifying activities, right? Everybody's going to leave with a little bit more of a friend by doing these things, right? So you have to surrender all that. Like, we're not here for them to learn a specific thing or whatever it is. We're here to, we're here to explore and explore the doctrines, engage together and learn, because the retention goes up as people engage this way. All right. Let me share with you another example. And again, you don't have to do this. I'm just sort of, hopefully the wheels in your head begin to turn of things you can do. In this talk, President Nelson gives these 3 questions. Here it is. So this important truth prompts 3 fundamental questions. So he said important truth. That's another way of saying doctrine, right? So you may come up here and be like, what was that important truth? So you can overcome the spiritual and emotional exhausting plagues of the world, including arrogance, pride, anger, immorality, hatred, greed, jealousy, and fear. Despite the distractions and distortions that swirl around us, you can find true rest, meaningful relief, and peace, even amid your most vexing problems. And then into these questions, okay? So this would be a great activity, a great sort of model to guide people through during your lesson. What I mean by that is you may say, all right, let's partner up with 2 or 3 people, and I want you to process these questions that President Nelson is asking. So you may say, all right, everybody, you got your partners. Let's take 1 minute each or whatever, or take 90 seconds to discuss together this first question. What does it mean to overcome the world? Ready, go. Chatter, chatter, chatter. And then as you bring them back, these are some powerful questions I've gotten from Deanna Murphy. If you go to Leading Saints, just search Leading Saints Deanna Murphy into Google, and I'll try and remember to link it in the show notes. She gives some great, there's an episode there. She gives a handful of questions that are so powerful. I should even replay that here on this podcast stream. But anyways, so you may bring back out of the discussion. Okay, what did you notice? That's a powerful one. What stood out when you were discussing them? What did others in your group say that you found really insightful? You see what you're doing here? Like, this is what relying on the Spirit looks like. You didn't come in with knowing what they're going to say, but you've surrendered it. You've said, I'm turning this over to the Spirit. If something was said in that group that needs to be heard by the entire group, now's the time for them to do that, right? All right, great discussion. Let's get back to this. I mean, these 3 questions, this activity I'm articulating could fill 40, 50 minutes easy, all right? Or at least a good chunk of the time. All right, second, how do we do it? How do we overcome the world? All right, here we go. Right. And it might be too similar to the next one, but that's all right. Give them 30 seconds and then that might spur on a question as you come back. What was different about the responses to the second question that maybe wasn't mentioned in the first question? Right. Who wants to go first? Boom, boom, boom. All right, now we're bringing everybody back together. The third question: how does overcoming the world bless our lives? And I would love to have you, as you talk, really try and identify specific experiences, real life stories that come to the surface that we could that articulates this principle, right? And by doing this, you're sort of forcing them to go back into their own life, saying like, yeah, where has this principle showed up? If they can find it in their own life, boom, conversion happens in that moment. There's a thing, okay, I've now connected the dots. Oh, yeah, I haven't thought about that for a while. It's been a tough week and I've sort of struggled with some doubt this week. But now, since this Elders Quorum, this Relief Society class, it's brought to a remembrance how these doctrines connect with my life. You see, redemption. People walk out more hopeful, right? It's not heavy or guilt ridden. Okay. All right, here's another concept I want to talk about. Maybe this is a mini episode for a future time, but just real quickly. Um, for example, this is a great quote, right? Overcoming the world, President Nelson says, overcoming the world is not an event that happens in a day or two. It happens over a lifetime as we repeatedly embrace the doctrine of Christ. We cultivate faith in Jesus Christ by repenting daily and keeping covenants that endow us with power. So you see my note here. I put, don't answer the questions through quotes. What I mean by that is it is so easy to have, because there's some mic drop moments that President Nelson has where he is actually responding to the questions you're answering. The temptation is to lead out with President Nelson's quotes or responses to the questions that you're asking, right? Because essentially, I talk about that activity of asking those three questions. Essentially, President Nelson is answering those questions with some of his following quotes. And so the temptation is to lead out with those, right? Well, President Nelson says this, and what do you think about that? And people say, well, I don't know, like I just agree with him. Amen. President Nelson, right? So don't fall into the temptation of saying, man, there's so many great quotes. I'm going to stack them up and I'm going to share these quotes, get through as many quotes as possible. The other mistake that a lot of teachers make is the white slips. Avoid the white slips, right? This is where you go through, you discover a variety of different quotes, and then you put these quotes on slips of white paper, you print them out and you cut them up, right? And then you hand them out before class. And this feels like classroom participation. It feels like it is. It is not classroom participation. It's a fallacy. Just because people are talking doesn't mean they're participating. They're just following directions. Their intellectual mind, their frontal cortex, whatever it is not engaging in the doctrines, and it's not working, right? It's just following directions or reading. So avoid just simply sharing quotes because they're really good and they should be stated. You can do that after, right? So maybe you've had this great discussion, and I would, with those, let me put this back up. With those three questions, maybe you've had this great, this great discussion that came out of there, epiphanies all around the room. And then as you close, you say, this is awesome. Let me share you, just in closing, some things that President Nelson said about these questions. Okay. And then you're going to go through and then you can read them off yourself, or maybe then you ask people to participate. And then that gives you like a foundation to close it up, to wrap it up with testimony, and just be like, oof, like I just recognize like what Brother Jensen said over there. Like that's where mine's going to be this week. And I promise you that just like Brother Jensen has shared, right? Like that is a reality in this life. Like I believe that to be a doctrinal truth, and that as we overcome the world and rely on Christ, our life won't be more burdened. It won't be heavier. It'll be freeing, right? You see how, and again, a lot of this is just a skill set that's going to take time, and it's going to take practice to get there. But these things will naturally happen as you sort of surrender your lesson plan and focus on the doctrine, a specific doctrine in there, right? And then teach the class. And by the end, you'll have so much to testify about, or someone else in the room will testify, right? You may see somebody like sharing, and you kind of see like a shift in them, like, wow, Brother Spenlove's like really getting into this. I'm going to ask him at the end to just stand and be like, what did you take away from today? Like, how does President Nielsen speak to your heart in this talk, right? And then he'll do the testifying. That's a whole another concept as far as recognizing the witnesses. Done right, like when you stimulate this kind of lesson, there are going to be moments of witnessing where someone has this epiphany where they have to raise their hand and share something. It's important to lean into that and be like, wait a minute, like something's happening within you. Like this is hitting you a little bit harder than others. And let me give you a quick example of what that looks like. I was teaching a Sunday school class, and I forget what principle it was or doctrine or what we were talking about, but a sister in the room raised her hand and talked about how she attended the funeral of her uncle that week, and her uncle actually died by suicide. It was just sort of this tragic, heavy moment. And the temptation was for me to just be like, "Oh, thanks, sister. Whew, like, let's move on. Like, I don't want to make you cry or dwell on this thing." But instead, I leaned into it and I said, "Hey, sister, like, can I ask you a few more questions about that?" Like, and I gave I gave a few more follow up questions, and she sort of broke down a little bit. But it was this moment where she wasn't embarrassed. It's like she was having a vulnerable moment where she was connecting with the entire group, and you could almost feel the whole classroom sort of lean in as we're doing that. She was having a witness moment where she's basically witnessing that, hey, Jesus showed up in my life this week, and I need to share that. That is testimony. That's what we need to share. In closing, I'll just share some various notes that came to mind. Again, this isn't a full comprehensive, that I've discovered every last bit of truth. You're going to discover some on your own. As I read through it, there's a lot of these statements of, he says, now you may be thinking this sounds more like hard spiritual work and rest, but here is the grand truth. While the world insists that power, possessions, popularity, and pleasures of the flesh bring happiness, they do not. They cannot. What they do produce is nothing but a hollow substitute for the blessed and happy state of those who keep the commandments of God. There's just a lot of these statements of like, it may feel like the church is hard or the gospel's hard, but it's not, right? So as I hear things repeated, that can lead to more ideas of like, okay, maybe that's a doctrine that we should focus on, right? And you're going to have to, uh, there's impossible choices here. There may be 10 doctrines, like I said, that you'll want to hyper focus on. You can't do it. Don't do it. Please. I beg you, don't do it. Pick one, maybe two as a backup if the first one goes too quick, but, and then dwell on that one, right? Here's another one I noted here. This is an entire lesson. This quote by Ezra Taft Benson, he said, men and women who turn their lives over to God will discover that he can make a lot more out of their lives than they can. He will deepen their joys, expand their vision, quicken their minds, lift their spirits, multiply their blessings, increase their opportunities, comfort their souls, raise up friends, and pour out peace. You see how you could take each one of those concepts and say, all right, let's break up into 10 groups or how many of these concepts there are. That group over there, I want you to take your multiply their blessings concept. Okay. I want you to come up with ways that you've seen that how Jesus has multiplied your blessings. Comfort your souls, right? I don't know why it wants to drag that. Anyways, here we go. Comfort their souls, raise it, right? You see how you can begin to break these things out and say, I want you to engage with those concepts. Why did he put them in there? What did he lift out? What would you add to the list, right? All right, another concept to take away from this is maybe you're thinking, man, I think I've picked out some doctrine, one doctrinal point that I want to focus on, but man, what if it only takes 20 minutes, or what if it only takes 30 minutes, and I'm standing there blinking with 15 minutes to go? A great strategy is to build a list of just general questions that you can fall back on and keep asking. So, for example, in this area here, take charge of your own testimony of Jesus Christ and His gospel. In this, I put how do you do this, right? So you could turn that into a question. How do you take charge of your own testimony of Jesus Christ? What does that look like? Now you also see avoid the Sunday school answer. And you may even say that. You ask that question. How do you take charge of your own testimony of Jesus Christ and His gospel? And I want to encourage you not to give me the rote Sunday school answer, go to church, read your scriptures. I want to know specifically, if someone asked you sincerely how you do this, what does that look like? And push through read your scriptures. Well, what does it mean to read your scriptures? Like, what does a study mean, right? Like, so get them to push past that. And so I'll share a variety of maybe questions that came to mind for me. But as you read it, like, so you may go through one pass with going through identifying the doctrine. Then you may do another pass of saying, okay, I'm going to find specific questions, like deeper questions that I could propose, put on my list that if I need to fall back on those, I can do that. Okay. Here's another one. I put it in red because not necessarily, I mean, it is a doctrine, I guess you could frame it that way, but this is the second time he's mentioned philosophies of men. Okay, so that would be right there. I mean, you could start off after you ask your warm-up question, you could go right into what does it mean by philosophies of men? President Nelson mentioned twice in this talk this concept of philosophies of men. I think the second or the first time he mentioned it, he used a different verbiage, but nonetheless, like, how do you, because isn't knowledge good, right? Aren't some philosophies of men good, right? You're sort of playing this contrarian, right? Because you're pushing them. Like, I want to know, like, does that mean if any philosophy from man that it's negative when you should avoid it? Like, what does that mean, right? Be a powerful discussion and a question to put on your list. Another tactic I came up with, I said there's so much in this talk that you could break up into topical groups. So you may identify, I don't know, maybe you identify 6 different strong doctrines. You can then break up the group into 6, or the elders quorum into 6 groups, depending on how big your group is, or do 2 groups or whatever, and say, all right, we're going to have 2 separate lessons here. All right, who wants to be the discussion leader in this group, in group A? All right, in group B, you're going to only focus on paragraph 13. And this group is only going to focus on the doctrine discussed in paragraph 20. All right. So let's go, and then we're going to take the last 10 minutes and see what we can learn together about these groups. Let's contrast what you learn with what they learn and see if we can find even more deeper principles. Okay. So that's another tactic when you come across a talk like all of President Nelson's talks that just have so much in them, so many concepts. Break it up and have kind of different classes going on. And by doing that, you're engaging their hearts and minds in the lesson and encourage them to learn more. All right. So I think we did it. That is sort of a quick overview of some ideas of teaching general conference, especially this lesson of overcome the world and find rest. I am just constantly amazed at just the insight, the intellect of our great prophet, President Nelson, even at his age of 98. Like, it is so baffling of the insight he gets at his age. And it's a testament of his leadership, of his prophetic role and mantle. So I love it. I would love to hear any ideas that you might have related to this talk. Let's share them. I'm not the all-knowing teacher. There's probably some more experienced teachers out there listening. If you want to submit some ideas, put them in the comment section. What are you going to do? Even if you want to send me a recording, maybe we'll play it on a future podcast, or we can insert it as its own podcast about related to this talk. Jump in, get it done. And man, I'm going to probably say this every talk, but don't skip over this one. Go talk to your elders quorum president, your release Sunday president, say, we need to talk about President Nelson's overcoming the world. All right. The next episode I'm probably going to do is Sister Browning's talk. I know that there's a handful of sister talks that that's probably not the best way of saying it, but you know what I mean. But talks from the female leaders that obviously in Relief Society, it's good to work those in, with a female audience or whatnot. So I think that's the next topic I'm going to go to. And we're trying to hit all the big, maybe the more popular talks that will be most likely to be talked about in Elders Quorum Relief Society. Maybe I hate saying that because I'm unintentionally creating ranking system for these talks. But hey, we're doing our best. They're all great. There's purpose and meaning for all these talks, as you know. So would love to have your support. I don't know. I'll probably create some type of Patreon page or whatnot. There's a lot of investment and behind the scenes work that goes into creating a project like Teaching General Conference. This is not a Leading Saints product and brand. So those funds are not available for this effort. So I'd love to have you check out the show notes and see ways that you can contribute and help fund and cover the editing and all the effort it takes to do this. And if you want more of me, more of my voice and perspective, my main focus is Leading Saints, and it's a podcast to help Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. And we'd love to catch you there. All right. Good luck teaching General Conference.